Have you ever yelled out, needing help, and got no response? More specifically, have you ever yelled out to God, needing help, and got no response? Have you ever felt that in your crying and in your yelling that possibly God was sleeping? Hey, I know in my life there have been many times where I felt I needed to say, hey God, wake up. Can't you see me? Don't you care about me? Do you realize the mess that I'm in? Can you see the crisis that I'm going through? Is it even possible for God to sleep through your crisis or my crisis? Let's talk about that using the story as we revisit today's scripture. Then Jesus got in the boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly, a furious storm came upon the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him up, saying, I think that should be more like yelling, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. And he replied, come on, you guys, what in the world is wrong with you? See, I think that's what he wanted to say. But he replied this way, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up and he rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this, that even the wind and the waves obey him? Could it be that we are living such small lives that we are actually putting God to sleep? You see, the story started out so well. Jesus got in the boat and the disciples followed him. Well, isn't that what we're supposed to do? Followers follow, right? That's what we've been taught all these years. When Jesus says, follow me, we say yes. Where Jesus goes, we go. When Jesus says, come along, then that's what we do. Well, I know when I answered my call to follow Jesus, I really didn't understand all the implications of that call. Or in this scenario, I didn't understand all the implications of getting in the boat with him. Evidently, the disciples didn't understand either, because they got really upset when that boat left the dock. When the boat went out farther and farther in the storm, they got even more unsettled, and then they really came unglued when they felt Jesus was sleeping and he was not interested in their safety. You see, I think so many of us like getting in the Jesus boat and rocking a little bit while it's still tied up to safety. Then Jesus unties the boat and he begins heading out to sea, and we immediately begin to get worried. Then he pilots the boat into the storm, and suddenly we begin getting spiritually seasick, saying, this is not the cruise that I signed up for. Did we get into the boat thinking Jesus, our captain, was now going to fix everything in our life? That Jesus was going to feed us always from the endless buffet? That he was going to make sure that we only sailed on glassy seas? Then the sudden life storms come. The winds begin to blow. The waves begin to crash over us, and we think, well, I followed you. I got in the boat with you. How could you let this happen to me? Think with me. Jesus knew that he was going to be betrayed. He knew that everyone who promised to be with him through thick and thin was going to disappear because of their fear. He knew he would be mocked. He knew he would be beaten. He knew that he would be nailed to a cross. But he also knew that on the third day, he would rise. Jesus chose to save humanity through sacrifice, so we should never think that following Jesus is not going to cost us something. When we say yes to following Jesus, we say yes to stepping into his boat. We say yes, we are embracing his mission to bring his children home, not just to rock safely in the harbor. Jesus came to end violence. Jesus came to end hatred. He came to end sickness. Jesus came to seek out the lost. He came out to shelter the homeless. Jesus came to adopt the orphan and bring joy and hope and love to all of humanity. When we board his boat, this is the mission he gives us. And you and I should know the boat will be heading directly into every one of those storms. The winds were raging. The waves were relentless. The disciples were fighting more and more. They were afraid of fighting this huge tempest. But Jesus was sleeping. You see, the disciples' assessment was they were in the worst case scenario. We're going to die. wake up, wake up. We're going to capsize. We're all going to drown. I don't think the boat heading into that storm was an accident. What storms are keeping you awake? What storms are you navigating in fear of capsizing? You see, these fishermen had been in boats before. These fishermen had faced storms before, but without Jesus. They had to fight, they had to pull, they had to work together. They were working the rigging back and forth. They had to battle through. They didn't have time to be afraid. But this time, I think, since they agreed to follow Jesus into his boat, they expected Jesus to do all the work. Often our misconception is that when we follow Jesus, he's going to be the one that bails us out of all of life's storms. But Jesus gets up, he looks and he says, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Because we are fishermen, we know boats. Because we're disciples, we know storms. We know that this is a bad one. So bad we think we're going to die. So he rebukes the wind and he rebukes the waves and everything becomes calm. In our storms, is the fear causing us to accuse God of things? In our storms, are we accusing God of being asleep, of being unaware? Are we accusing him of not caring about us? What if we in our faith approach the storm differently? What if we said, "Look at those waves. Feel that wind. I can hardly stand up. My stomach is in knots. Whoa, I'm about to lose it. Hey, look, Jesus is asleep." I mean, come on, we know who he is. We know how much he loves us. We know that he has always cared about our needs. He called us to follow him. He invited us into this boat. Look, just as always, like he promised, he is with us. Hey, if he can sleep through this, we can certainly live through this. There are so many people living in fear of drowning. So many are living guided by the worst case scenario. If we would just realize who God is in Jesus, if we would just understand that he is the captain of the boat, if we understand he intentionally headed right into the storm, and if we elevate our faith, we can understand that the man who calmed the wind and the waves can calm our raging souls. But our soul has to pay attention, just like the wind. Our soul has to obey, just like the waves. We have to trust him with our lives. We are in the boat with God, who created the wind and the waves. What kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him? You and I should never have to ask that question. You see, our past wind and waves that we have been delivered from should be the firm foundation that our faith is shouted from. That lets us know that we are in the right boat. We are in the right waters. We are with the right captain, and we are headed into the right storm. The Jesus boat never stays tied to the dock, disciples. It always heads into deep, challenging, adventurous waters that will awaken our souls. Our calling is to listen to what Jesus taught, to believe in who Jesus said he was, and to believe in who he is. If so, we would not have time ever to be afraid, because we would be comforting others in the storm. I'm glad you joined me in the boat. Now would you join me in being a storm chaser for Jesus?